Unique people leading unique lives shape and inform Iowa City. This community is enhanced by these women and men who live in our midst, working, teaching, creating. Welcome to a series of conversations with people who have stories to tell. Join my guests and me, Ellen Buchanan, in a series of interviews called One of a Kind. Charlie Eble is one of the first names that come to mind when we think about music in our community. Throughout the years as a music student, secretary to Professor Clapp, owner of the nationally known bookstore Eble Music, ardent fan of local university state orchestras, lifelong friend to local practicing artists, and benefactor to students, Charlie Eble's dedication and deep appreciation of music has been steadfast. Charlie's imprint is on the University of Iowa School of Music, Civic Music Association, Friends of Music, Hancher, Bruckner Society of America, Chamber Singers, and much more. For his longtime support of the University of Iowa, he won the Distinguished Alumni Award in 1989. Words used to describe Charlie Eble are compassionate, modest, generous, and an independent thinker. Welcome, Charlie, to One of a Kind. I know your story begins in Hubbard, Nebraska, where you were born in October 1914. Tell me about your family and what brought you to Iowa City.
Well, I don't remember much about Nebraska at all, but we moved to Iowa when I was 6 years old in a little town, Shelby, Iowa, 30 miles from Council Bluffs in Omaha. There I went through grade school and high school. And from the time I was in high school, my brother's wife, who taught in the school, was a graduate of the University of Iowa. And from that time on, I had dreams that I wanted to go to the University of Iowa. And that's what brought me to Iowa City in 1934.
Charlie, what was your father a farmer?
No, my father was a carpenter.
Oh, he was a carpenter.
He built houses in Nebraska. Then he came to Iowa because the market in Nebraska had dwindled. Then he didn't build too many houses around Shelby, Iowa, until that market also ceased. Then he went to the Burlington Railroad shops in Omaha, and there he was a carpenter until he died.
And you had, from a big family, brothers
Yes,
and sisters?
Yes, I had 6 sisters and 2 brothers. So we had a large family and we had a good time.
Tell me who or what gave you or stirred in you this deep appreciation and love of music?
Well, I think I always had the interest in music, but my oldest brother, George, saw to it when I was a freshman in high school that I started the clarinet. So I played clarinet all through high school and a couple of years here at the university. And at the same time, I had an interest in piano. And I think one of my sisters might have started me on the piano. And then a lady who lived in Harlan, Iowa, who would come to Shelby once a week to teach piano, somehow or other she heard about me. So she gave me piano without any charge all the time I was in Shelby.
How did you earn your money? Would you have a job growing up in high school?
Well, during high school, I worked part-time for a bank on Saturdays and sometimes after school. And on other occasions, in the summers before that, I worked on a farm. But it so happened the one farmer that I worked hardest for, while I got my board and room, I never got any cash. And my brother George, after I came to school, I really thought I needed the money. But my brother George told me, so, oh, forget about it. He doesn't have any money and you're not going to get it anyway.
So you came to Iowa and you had a part-time job when you went to school here. You worked in the music department.
Yes. When I came here, I can't remember what might have been NRA anyway. It was a student assistant program. And then I lived in a cooperative dormitory. And so the first person I came to work for in university was Professor Ryder, who's still living now.
And then when did you become CLAP's secretary?
Then in the middle of the second year I was here, Harriet Smith, who was working for CLAP, husband was going to leave. And so since I had been acquainted with the two offices, music and Professor Ryder, she thought I'd be a good one to take over her job. And so that's the start of that.
What was he like to work for? Because he had rather a notorious reputation.
Well, he did have a notorious reputation, and people were afraid of him. He put the fear of God in a lot of people. Orchestra rehearsals sometimes weren't too pleasant because he was exacting in his standards.
Did he yell?
Well, yes, he wouldn't mind yelling. But anyway, to work for, he was a very decent sort. And then after I worked for a while, then he more or less left things up to me. And he would dictate letters and stuff, and we'd do the department business. But he was always very kind to me, and he'd have me out to his house, and I could talk to him about music and this and that. But piano, he had a piano seminar, and all the students, piano students, would go to that. And you never knew when he was going to call on you to play. But if he called on you, then you'd have to get up and play. And if he wasn't happy with what you did, he wouldn't mind telling you.
In front of everyone.
Oh, yes, in front of everyone.
You practiced really hard,
well,
didn't you?
Yes, people would go there with fear and trembling. But other times, if he liked it, he'd be very complimentary. Or he could tell you, better do a little bit more work on that.
Do you think he's one of the reasons the School of Music, one of the reasons, has enjoyed such a national reputation?
Oh, I think so, because he himself was a genius, not only one of the great pianists of all time, but he knew his music. And he read scores from the score onto the piano. But he knew he didn't have too much favor for early composers. But from Bach on, he knew everything about music. There's no one that could put him in the shade.
You've also had a long and enduring friendship with Jaime Waxman, who also I think was involved with CLAP and then was the director of the School of Music.
Yeah. Well, CLAP was a very good friend of Jaime Waxman's. And when I first came to university, then I was studying both piano and clarinet. And so I had 2 years of lessons with clarinet. But at the end of my second year with clarinet, I felt that I really needed to devote my time to my main instrument, which was the piano. So I just kind of dropped the clarinet. Sometimes I'm sorry I did. But since that time, I've had a good friendship with Jaime.
And you two both have that interest in finding rare music.
Well, he had a great interest in his instrument and the literature for the instrument. So when I was working for CLAP, I don't remember exactly how we started to get music from abroad, but there was a firm in Hungary from whom we got music that we couldn't get in Iowa City at all. So we got a lot of music there. And Jaime was interested in early editions, standard editions of music that weren't readily available here. And so we got a lot of music for him from abroad. And he'd get catalogs and he'd mark what he wanted. So that's when, and that it kept expanding so that he became an expert in the literature for woodwinds. Not only the clarinet, but flute, oboe, and bassoon too.
Well, now, after about 1941, you, instead of waiting to be drafted, you enlisted. Tell me about this part of your story. How long were you gone, and what branch did you serve in?
Well, after I got my BA degree, I stayed in school one more. It took me 6 years to get my BA degree because after my first year, I only went to school half-time. Then the war situation was getting worse, and everyone was getting a draft number. So I, like everyone else, got a draft number. So I knew I was going to have to either go into the Army or into the Navy or Marines. And I decided that I would rather be in the Navy. So I enlisted in the Navy in June when I knew my number was coming up.
And
so
you were decoding messages, I read. Is that right?
Well, that's about all I did in the Navy was secretarial work. When I was aboard ship, it was all just typing and book work, and once in a while a letter for an officer.
So you were out to sea for a year?
No, I wasn't out to sea. I was at sea maybe 6 months, aboard a heavy cruiser in the Atlantic. And then, I was aboard a ship, the Washington, an old battleship, before the war started. But then after the war had started, about 5 or 6 months, I decided, anyway, even when I was in the Washington, I decided I didn't want to keep on as an enlisted person. And the only thing that was keeping me away from being a commissioned officer was mathematics. So I started taking a correspondence course in mathematics from the university. And I'd spend my evenings, when I wasn't going to concerts, in the Boston Public Library studying mathematics. But then, after I got aboard the heavy cruiser and we'd been in the war about 6 months, then it turned out that people with college degrees could get a commission without the mathematics requirements. So then I got a commission.
Tell me, after the war, you you finished your degree in English.
Yes.
And then?
Well, I was going to keep on with the war, but you mentioned about the coding business. Then when I became an officer, I was in Washington, D.C. for a year. And the only work that I did there was typing. Either we would break down messages on keyboard, or we'd be sending them out. Or the messages that came in, just decoded, we would sit at a table and then put them in different language so that there'd be no connection with the message that the departments received and what was encoded, because that'd make it too easy for them to break the code. Then when I left Washington, D.C., I went out to Guadalcanal for 2 years. All I did in Guadalcanal was to go swimming and type right there too. After then, I came back to San Francisco. What did I do there? More typing.
See, it was that secretarial job you had with Clapp that started all this, Charlie.
Yes. Well, it was the fact that when I was in high school, I took shorthand. So I got drafted once when I was in Boston and wanted to go to a concert down in New York City. I was suddenly called on to take testimony in a court-martial. And I barely made the concert.
That's a good story. I do want to find out about how you decided, with your English background, your music background, your secretarial background, breaking the code, how you decided to get into book selling in the bookstore business.
Well, I had decided after the war, I had decided that performance wasn't my big point, because I didn't seem to have particularly good memory where I could sit down and do anything. Anyway, so then I decided when I came back from the service that I would take English literature. So I did 3 years of graduate work in English literature. And then when I finished my coursework and had started on my dissertation, I had to go out and start earning a living. So I went to Northwestern and taught English for 1 year. And I was successful there, and we had a good relation with my students. But then I came back that summer to do more work on my graduate dissertation. And then Jaime Voxman told me that the person that was here in Iowa City by the name of Hewitt was interested in selling his business. And he says, you ought to consider taking it over. And by that time, I felt I wanted to get settled down. And so I decided, well, I had enough money to save up that I could buy the business. And so I bought the business, and that was it.
And the rest is history.
And I had to be happy with that, even though one friend told me, you know, 50% of the time the people start business, they go broke. And I thought, well, if I go broke, I go broke. But I didn't have to worry about it, really.
What do you think Eble music's greatest strengths have been over the years? I mean, it enjoys a reputation nationally.
Well, I think the greatest strength was our knowledge of the field. When they wanted to know something, they could call us and be confident that we could find it out, and that we could furnish all the information they needed, and if they needed printed music, we could find out where to get it and get it for them. We weren't interested much in popular music. We had expertise in serious music, and I think that was our biggest strength, that people, when they wanted, they knew that we could deliver the goods, as the saying goes.
I remember climbing, like so many other people in Iowa City, up those narrow stairs to find a piece of sheet music for a budding young instrumentalist. And I know my research assistant, Suzanne, said that she remembered climbing those stairs too, but you said, yeah, but you all had to go way down to the basement.
Yes, we had stock in the basement, so we more or less laughed at those people, saying, look, you shouldn't be complaining when we have to go up and down several times, many times a day, and we don't complain. But there was a professor at Ames who was here in school and got a PhD here, and when she called me on the phone once, and sometimes I didn't always talk to her, and she said to me, oh, it's such a comfort to talk to you, because she says, I know you understand what I want and what I need.
Can't ask for more than that.
So that's what helps.
Sure. Yeah. Was it hard to retire from the business, Charlie, or was it time?
Well, I think it was time. I had decided when I was 70 that I might work till I was 75. But I had read someplace about someone saying, don't postpone retirement too much. Let the people under you have a chance at it. And so I thought, well, why shouldn't I give someone else a chance, as long as I had enough money to live the rest of my days on. And I didn't think I really needed much money for that, as long as I could eat.
I want to ask...
And then I had a good person, Dave Hempel, to take the business over, and knowing it'd be run much the same way.
Reading your research about you, I know you've had association with lots of orchestras, both locally and in the state, and you've been a patron of the Chicago Symphony over the years, for many years, for over 40 years. I want to ask you about your part in, before Hancher, before we had this wonderful performing studio or an auditorium. What did people in Iowa City do to go hear a recital or a traveling orchestra?
Well, the Cedar Rapids had some sort of a symphony, and Davenport had the Quad City Orchestra at that time, the Tri-City Orchestra, and a lot of our faculty members played in that orchestra. They had good soloists of repute always playing with them. So it was easy enough to go over there to their concerts. And
Then you were
when
involved in civic music.
yes, when I first worked for Professor Ryder, one of my jobs, he was manager of the university concert course, usually 3 or 4 concerts. And one of my first jobs was delivering posters around the university buildings, advertising these. But then when I came back from Northwestern, the first year I was here back, they had established while I was in the war civic music organization. And that would sponsor 4 or 5 concerts a year. They would have a membership drive, get in so many subscribers for so much money, and then decide what they could have for that amount of money. So when I came back, the people knowing me and my interest in music wanted me to be on the board. So I helped out on the board. And we had good people in the board then. Audie Blody and Martha Else and Alex Kern, all those people.
And the performances were, you told me, in McBride?
They were in McBride Hall. Then as time went on, we became a little bit dissatisfied with Columbia artists who ran civic music because we had to rely solely upon their artists. And we wanted people other than Columbia artists. And the people that we had, we knew the musicians and we knew what we could get. And so then Frank Seiberling, who was on the board at that time, suggested that we discontinue civic music, that we have a group on our own, and we called ourselves Friends of Music. And with Friends of Music, we went on much the same way, except then we would have a membership drive, and we had to have guarantors, because we decide then, at that time, we decided what we wanted before we had our drive. And then if we didn't get enough people to pay them, then the guarantors would have to kick in. But we never had, that didn't happen too often.
That's wonderful to know that you people were keeping the interest alive before we got a bigger performing center.
Well, yes, when Rita Benton was on the board, she'd always hear, she came from the New York scene, and she'd hear people that were good artists that would not have the tremendous fees that the well-known artists would have. So we'd get just as good a concerts from someone coming up in the world as the well-established ones.
Over the years, you've sat at hundreds and hundreds of concerts and recitals. Looking back, Charlie, over 60-some years of going to concerts, are there a few that just stick out in your mind that were just unforgettable, that you thought were quite remarkable?
Well, here in Iowa City, Astrid Varney, a soprano, gave one of the best concerts, I think.
Would you repeat the name again?
Astrid Varney, a Swedish singer. She gave a tremendous vocal recital here, and she was a very nice person. Gina Bachauer was here twice, a pianist, and both concerts were marvelous. And when I was in the service, I heard Bruno Walter with the New York Philharmonic. That sticks in my mind, too. And also Flogstad, when in 1936, during Christmas vacation, sang with the Chicago Symphony. And then another great concert was with John Sims and David Lloyd. That was in the university. But all those were great events.
Looking back, Charlie, over the years,
And of course, Clapp's performances too.
Who's made a difference in your life? Who's influenced you? I think it's going to maybe perhaps Clapp.
Well, Clapp had a great influence because in fact he was a giant as far as that goes, but he was still very much a human being, and he was always very friendly to me. And if I wanted to hear something, then I didn't have a radio, access to a radio. All I had to do was call him up and tell him I wanted to come out. They were very friendly. And then Jaime Voxman, you know, once we became good friends, he's had a great influence too.
There's another part of you that maybe some people always connect you with music. Your neighbor, John Clancy, told me you're quite a gardener, Charlie. That you're,
Well, you
and
are.
somebody else told me, Adi Bodie told me you're a great cook.
Well, I do enjoy my work in the garden, and I have a pretty big garden. And
What
so
kind of flowers, vegetables?
Mostly vegetables. But I have a lot of daffodils in the yard, and the reason I have daffodils because in the service when I was in New Zealand on a few days vacation, I was there in October, and in Christchurch, New Zealand, all the parks and everything were just vast fields of daffodils, and I still have pictures of those. And when I came back, I thought, if I ever have a place of my own, I'm going to have daffodils all over the place. Well, I don't have them all over the place, but there are quite a lot of them.
And, excuse me, go ahead.
And then before the place where I live now, after I bought the land, I went out there and I grew corn and beans before I even had a house. And that, Harold Stark helped me get started on that. Then once I had a house, then I had to have a garden for lettuce and beans and corn.
Tomatoes?
Oh, a lot of tomatoes.
You grow a lot of tomatoes?
Yes, I grow scads of tomatoes, but last summer was a failure.
Well, with all
yeah.
that rain and moisture. And where did you get your love of cooking? I hear you make breads and popovers and coffee cakes and pies and plum kuchens.
Well, as I said, I sometimes think that's a myth. But anyway, people are kind.
You enjoy it, I take it.
Yes.
A lot.
But the first year I was in the university, as I said, I lived in a cooperative dormitory, and I was on the cooking crew. And so I was on, the first year, I was on breakfast. And then every fourth Sunday, we'd have to cook Sunday dinner. So that, I think the first pie I ever baked was when I was in the dormitory.
That's wonderful.
And then when I came back and had a house of my own, and well, even before when I was renting a house, I liked to have people over, so it was always a matter of, if you don't know how, try it. And so that isn't too difficult, as long as you didn't have a failure.
So Iowa City has been good. You're glad you decided to leave Chicago and come here.
Yes, it's been good to me.
Well,
yeah.
and you've been good for Iowa City, Charlie.
Well, I hope so.
Yes, I appreciate you sharing your story today on One of a Kind.
Thank you.
My guest on One of a Kind has been Charlie Eble. For over 60 years, Mr. Eble has quietly but generously contributed to Iowa City and the university's musical community. His deep appreciation of fine music, his generosity in aiding students, his loyal support of music programs and orchestras, his love of the environment, gardening, define this compassionate and modest man. Charlie Eble is one of a kind.